Some words are louder than shouting, and some moments are so quiet they change a life forever. The dinner rush had reached its peak when the sound stopped. Forks froze halfway to polished plates. Crystal glasses stood untouched beneath the warm glow of chandeliers. Even the soft piano drifting through the elegant dining room seemed to disappear beneath a heavier silence. Every eye turned toward table 12, where billionaire Nathan Carter stood with one hand pressed against the white linen tablecloth, his expensive charcoal suit perfectly tailored, his jaw clenched with unmistakable frustration. "Is this really the level of service people applaud these days?" he demanded, his voice cutting cleanly across the restaurant. No one answered. No one dared to. Employees knew Nathan Carter's name long before they ever saw his face. Founder of a multi-billion-dollar technology empire. Magazine covers. Television interviews. Boardrooms where billion-dollar decisions lasted less than 10 minutes. People described him with the same words over and over. Brilliant. Demanding. Ruthless. Tonight, every one of those words seemed painfully accurate. Standing only a few feet away was Claire Bennett, 26 years old. White. Blonde hair gathered neatly beneath a simple ponytail. Crisp black apron. White shirt without a wrinkle despite hours on her feet. She held a small leather order book in both hands with the same calm posture she had maintained since her shift began 6 hours earlier. She neither stepped backward nor raised her voice. Around her, fellow servers exchanged nervous glances. The restaurant manager had already started walking quickly across the dining room, silently praying the situation would somehow dissolve before reaching his table. Nathan's guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One executive adjusted his tie without looking up. Another reached for his water glass simply to avoid making eye contact. No one wanted to interrupt a billionaire while he was angry. Nathan pointed toward the plate, resting untouched before him. "I asked for perfection. Instead, I get excuses." Claire looked briefly at the table, then back at him. Her breathing never changed. Her shoulders remained relaxed. She had seen impatient customers before. Wealthy customers. Famous customers. People convinced that money could purchase flawless moments. Yet something about this evening felt different. The air itself seemed to hesitate. Somewhere behind the bar, a bartender stopped drying a wine glass. A hostess remained frozen beside the entrance, menus still tucked beneath her arm. Conversations that moments earlier filled the room had vanished completely. Nathan took another step closer. "Do you even understand who you're speaking to?" His words echoed across the marble floor. Claire finally lifted her eyes fully to meet his. Not with defiance. Not with fear. Simply with quiet certainty. Then she spoke one sentence. Softly. Calmly. So quietly that those nearest leaned forward just to hear it. "Mr. Carter, the person embarrassing himself tonight isn't wearing an apron." Silence. Complete. Absolute. Nathan Carter didn't blink. The color slowly disappeared from his face. His lips parted slightly, but no sound followed. The confidence that had filled the room only seconds before seemed to drain away beneath the weight of 12 carefully chosen words. A spoon slipped from someone's hand several tables away, the tiny metallic sound startling everyone because it was suddenly the loudest noise in the restaurant. No one moved. No one whispered. The manager stopped walking. Nathan's business partners stared first at Claire, then at Nathan, waiting for the explosion they were certain would follow. It never came. Instead, Nathan remained perfectly still, looking into the eyes of a waitress who showed no anger, no satisfaction, no triumph. Only dignity. Somewhere beyond the towering windows, rain began tapping softly against the glass, as though the city itself had paused to witness whatever would happen next. None of the people sitting inside that restaurant realized they were watching the first few seconds of a story that would travel far beyond those walls. They believed they had just witnessed a billionaire lose his temper. They had no idea they had actually witnessed the exact moment power quietly changed hands. The silence held for several long seconds before anyone remembered how to breathe. Nathan Carter remained motionless, his gray eyes fixed on Claire Bennett as though he had never truly looked at another person until that moment. Around them, the restaurant slowly returned to life. A chair shifted. Someone quietly cleared a throat. Crystal glasses touched linen as uncertain hands found them again. Yet the atmosphere had changed in a way no one could explain. Claire lowered her eyes first, not out of submission, but because another table needed fresh coffee. She gently closed her order book, offered a polite nod, and stepped away without waiting for praise or preparing for punishment. It was as though the confrontation belonged to the past the moment her sentence had left her lips. The manager finally reached table 12, his heartbeat still racing beneath his tailored jacket. "Mr. Carter, I sincerely apologize if there has been any misunderstanding," he said carefully, forcing a professional smile that did little to hide his anxiety. Nathan did not answer immediately. His attention remained fixed on Claire as she crossed the dining room, carrying a fresh pot of coffee with steady hands. She stopped beside an elderly couple celebrating what appeared to be an anniversary. Her smile became warm, genuine. She poured coffee without spilling a single drop, listened patiently to a quiet request about dessert, and thanked them as though they were the only guests in the restaurant. Nothing about her suggested she had just stood her ground against one of the wealthiest men in America. Nathan finally spoke, but not loudly this time. "What is her name?" The manager blinked, surprised by the question. "Claire Bennett, sir." Nathan repeated the name almost silently, committing it to memory. Claire Bennett. The name carried no famous family legacy, no recognizable corporation, no headline. Just two ordinary words belonging to a woman who had somehow refused to be intimidated by extraordinary wealth. Across the dining room, several employees gathered discreetly near the service station. "She is finished," one whispered. "There is no way she keeps her job after tonight." Another server slowly shook his head. "Did you see his face? I have never seen anyone speak to him like that." "Neither have I." The youngest hostess glanced toward Claire. She did not even sound angry. That observation lingered in the air. Claire had not raised her voice. She had not argued. She had not tried to embarrass Nathan. She had simply spoken the truth as she saw it, then returned to work. It was almost impossible to understand. Most people either challenged power with emotion or surrendered to it with fear. Claire had chosen neither. She chose dignity. As she placed another dinner plate before a family seated near the windows, a little boy accidentally knocked his spoon onto the polished hardwood floor. Before his embarrassed parents could react, Claire crouched beside him with an encouraging smile. "Do not worry," she said softly. "That happens to all of us." She returned moments later with a clean spoon, and the boy smiled with visible relief. Nathan watched the small exchange from across the room. He had spent decades studying executives, investors, negotiators, and competitors. He believed people revealed themselves when money entered the conversation. Yet this woman seemed exactly the same whether she was serving an anniversary dinner, comforting a child, or facing down a billionaire. There was no performance, no calculation, only consistency. That unsettled him more than her sentence had. One of his business associates leaned closer. "Nathan, we should probably leave. You have an early board meeting tomorrow morning." Nathan barely heard him. His expensive Swiss watch reflected the chandelier light as he slowly folded his napkin onto the table. For the first time in years, an unfinished business deal was not occupying his thoughts. Instead, he found himself wondering about a waitress whose calm seemed stronger than authority itself. Who was Claire Bennett before she ever wore that black apron? What kind of life taught someone to remain so composed while standing alone in front of an entire room? He had built an empire by uncovering hidden value where everyone else saw nothing. Tonight, for reasons he could not fully explain, that instinct had quietly awakened once. Again, Nathan Carter rose from his chair without another word. His business associates immediately followed, assuming the dinner had ended, but he did not head toward the entrance. Instead, he walked slowly across the dining room, his polished leather shoes making almost no sound against the dark hardwood floor. The restaurant staff instinctively stiffened. More than one employee quietly stepped aside, expecting another confrontation. Claire noticed him approaching only after she finished placing a dessert in front of the elderly couple. She thanked them with the same warm smile she had offered all evening before turning calmly toward Nathan. Their eyes met again. This time there was no audience waiting for an argument, only curiosity hanging silently between them. Nathan spoke first. "How long have you worked here?" His voice carried none of the sharp edge that had filled the restaurant minutes earlier. Claire answered simply, "Almost 3 years. Only here." She nodded once. "Yes, sir." Nathan glanced around the dining room before asking another question that surprised even himself. "Do people always speak to you the way I did?" Claire looked briefly toward the rain sliding down the tall windows. "Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do not." And you never answer back? A faint smile appeared at the corner of her lips. I answer when it matters. Nathan absorbed the words in silence. They were not clever. They were not dramatic. Yet they carried the weight of someone who had practiced patience for far longer than one difficult evening. Before he could continue, another customer quietly called Claire's name from across the room. She excused herself with a polite nod and walked away, leaving Nathan standing alone beside an empty aisle. He watched her greet the guests exactly as she had greeted everyone else. There was no lingering pride after standing up to him. No attempt to impress nearby tables. She served coffee, refilled water, recommended desserts, and thanked every guest with equal kindness. She treated the family celebrating a birthday exactly the same as the businessman eating alone near the fireplace. Wealth changed nothing about the way she carried herself. Nathan slowly returned to his table, but he no longer noticed the expensive wine or the untouched meal cooling in front of him. His thoughts drifted somewhere unexpected. He remembered his own father, a mechanic in a small Ohio town, who had once told him that true character revealed itself when nobody important was watching. Nathan had dismissed that advice years ago, replacing it with another belief. Results mattered. Winning mattered. Success mattered. Character was something people talked about after the meeting was over. Yet tonight, a waitress earning hourly wages had somehow shaken a philosophy that billions of dollars had never challenged. His assistant, Daniel Brooks, quietly stepped closer. The car is waiting outside whenever you are ready. Nathan looked toward the entrance, but remained seated. Daniel. Yes, sir. Find out everything you legally can about Claire Bennett. Daniel hesitated. Employment history? Everything. Nathan paused before adding, education, previous jobs, volunteer work, anything that explains her. Daniel had worked beside Nathan for nearly 8 years. He knew this tone. It was the same quiet determination Nathan used before acquiring a struggling company that everyone else had overlooked. Nathan never became curious without a reason. I will start tonight, Daniel replied. Nathan nodded absent-mindedly while his gaze remained fixed on Claire. She laughed softly at something an elderly woman whispered to her. She carefully folded a child's dropped napkin before handing it back with both hands. She thanked a dishwasher carrying heavy trays as though he were the owner of the building. Small moments. Invisible moments. Moments most people would never notice. Nathan noticed every one of them. Success had taught him to identify patterns. Tonight, he saw one that made little sense. Every person around Claire seemed calmer after speaking with her. Every conversation became lighter. Every table smiled more often. It was not charisma. It was something quieter. Respect freely given before respect was ever received. As the rain outside continued falling over the city lights, Nathan realized he no longer cared about proving himself right. For the first time in many years, he wanted only one thing. He wanted to understand how someone wearing the simplest uniform in the room had managed to possess the one kind of authority money had never been able to buy. The evening finally came to an end just after 10 o'clock. One table at a time, the elegant dining room emptied until only the gentle sound of rain and distant traffic remained beyond the tall windows. Claire folded the last white linen napkin, thanked the kitchen staff one by one, and hung her black apron neatly inside her locker. Her routine never changed. She believed that finishing a day with the same care she began, it was a quiet form of self-respect. While other employees replayed the confrontation again and again, Claire never mentioned it. She simply changed into a light gray sweater, dark jeans, and a navy raincoat before stepping into the cool Manhattan night, with a worn canvas bag resting comfortably over one shoulder. Across the street, a black luxury sedan remained parked beneath the glow of a street lamp. Daniel Brooks sat behind the wheel, watching discreetly through the windshield. Nathan occupied the back seat, his attention never leaving the restaurant entrance. He had attended international summits, billion-dollar negotiations, and private meetings with world leaders, yet somehow waiting outside a neighborhood restaurant felt stranger than any of them. The door opened. Claire stepped outside, raised her hood against the steady rain, and started walking instead of looking for a ride. Nathan glanced at his watch. Does she not drive? Daniel looked down at the preliminary notes already gathered. Apparently not. According to the manager, she usually takes the subway. Nathan watched her disappear into the crowd. She moved with purpose but never rushed, occasionally holding a door for strangers or stepping aside to let others pass first. Small gestures, almost invisible, yet they seemed as natural to her as breathing. "Do not follow too closely," Nathan said quietly. "I only want to understand her routine." Daniel nodded before easing the sedan into traffic several car lengths behind. Claire walked nearly half a mile through streets shimmering beneath reflected city lights. She passed expensive boutiques without slowing, ignored bright advertisements promising luxury, and eventually entered a modest neighborhood grocery store. Nathan remained inside the vehicle while Daniel observed from a respectful distance. 10 minutes later, Claire emerged carrying only one reusable grocery bag. Fresh vegetables, bread, eggs, milk. Nothing unnecessary, nothing extravagant. Daniel returned to the car after she continued walking toward the subway entrance. "She shops carefully," he said. "No expensive items." Nathan stared thoughtfully through the rain-covered window. People reveal priorities by what they buy when nobody is watching. Daniel remained silent. He had heard Nathan analyze corporations that way many times. Tonight, however, Nathan was studying one ordinary person with the same attention he usually reserved for investment opportunities. The next morning, Daniel arrived at Nathan's office carrying a slim folder. "This is everything available through public records and employment references." Nathan set aside financial reports worth hundreds of millions of dollars and opened the folder immediately. The information was surprisingly brief. Claire Bennett, 26 years old, raised in Vermont. Bachelor's degree completed at a respected state university with honors in organizational communication. Employment history that made little sense. A nonprofit internship. A bookstore. Then nearly 3 years as a waitress. No lawsuits. No scandals. No social media presence worth mentioning. No indication that she had ever sought attention. Nathan frowned. "There is something missing." Daniel nodded. "I had the same impression." Her professors described her as exceptionally composed. One even wrote that she had natural leadership ability. Nathan slowly closed the folder. "Then why is she waiting tables?" Daniel spread his hands slightly. "I could not find the answer." Nathan leaned back in his chair, looking through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. His calendar was filled from sunrise until evening with acquisitions, interviews, and shareholder meetings. Yet none of those appointments occupied his thoughts. Instead, he remembered Claire quietly comforting a frightened child, thanking the dishwasher, and speaking 12 unforgettable words without anger. Successful people often worked hard to appear extraordinary. Claire seemed to work equally hard to remain unnoticed. That contradiction refused to leave his mind. He reached for his phone, looked up the restaurant's reservation page, and reserved the same table for the following Friday evening. Daniel looked surprised. "Business dinner?" Nathan allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. "No. This time I intend to ask better questions than I did the first time." Friday evening arrived beneath a clear autumn sky, and the restaurant glowed once again with soft golden lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside, nothing appeared different. The crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished tables. Quiet conversations floated through the room. A pianist filled the air with familiar melodies. Yet for Nathan Carter, everything had changed since his last visit. This time he entered alone. No investors. No executives. No assistants walking behind him with tablets full of schedules. He simply handed his coat to the hostess and quietly requested table 12. The hostess recognized him immediately, but she also noticed something unfamiliar. He smiled. Not the polished smile photographers captured during magazine interviews, but the smaller, uncertain expression of someone entering unfamiliar territory. Claire noticed him only after greeting another family near the entrance. For the briefest moment, surprise crossed her face before it settled into the same calm professionalism she offered every guest. She approached carrying a leather menu. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. Welcome back." Nathan stood as she arrived, a gesture that surprised both of them. "Good evening, Claire." She gently placed the menu before him. "May I bring you sparkling water?" Nathan hesitated before answering. "Only if you recommend it." Claire smiled politely. "I do. Then I will trust your recommendation." It was a simple exchange, yet the words carried a quiet acknowledgement that had not existed 1 week earlier. As Claire walked toward the service station, several employees exchanged puzzled looks. The billionaire who had once demanded perfection now waited patiently, reading the menu without checking his watch once. When Claire returned with the sparkling water, Nathan looked up before she could pour. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "If it does not interfere with my work." "Fair enough." He folded the menu closed. "Why did you become a waitress?" Claire poured the water slowly, watching the bubbles rise through the glass before answering. "Because it was honest work." Nathan waited, expecting more. None came. "You graduated with honors." Claire looked at him with quiet surprise. "You did your research." Nathan did not deny it. "Yes." She placed the bottle gently onto the table. "Then you also know that information does not always explain a person." Nathan found himself smiling despite being challenged once again. "No, apparently it does not." Before he could continue, another server approached carrying a tray of meals intended for a nearby table. As he turned, one dinner plate shifted dangerously toward the edge of the tray. Claire reacted instantly. She stepped forward, steadied the tray with one hand, and quietly helped the young server regain his balance before any food reached the floor. The entire moment lasted no more than 2 seconds. "Thank you," the embarrassed young man whispered. Claire simply smiled. "We all need someone to steady the tray sometimes." Nathan watched every second. There had been no dramatic rescue. No applause. The nearby guests barely noticed what had happened. Yet Claire immediately returned to his table as though nothing unusual had occurred. "I apologize for the interruption." Nathan slowly shook his head. "Do you know what impressed me most?" Claire waited. "You helped him before thinking about whether anyone was watching." She considered the statement for a moment. "Most people are carrying something heavy. Sometimes you can see it. Sometimes you cannot." Nathan lowered his eyes to the tablecloth. Those words landed somewhere deeper than he expected. Throughout his career, he had rewarded performance, efficiency, and measurable results. Claire kept speaking about people instead of outcomes. Somehow her perspective felt both unfamiliar and strangely obvious. A few moments later, she returned with his dinner. Before leaving, she quietly said, "I hope you enjoy your meal, Mr. Carter." Nathan looked at the carefully prepared plate, but found himself paying little attention to the food. Instead, he watched Claire continue through the dining room. She greeted every guest by name whenever possible. She remembered allergies without writing them down. She thanked the kitchen staff every time they placed a finished dish into her hands. Nothing she did seemed designed to impress anyone. It was simply who she was. And for the second Friday in a row, Nathan Carter realized he had come searching for answers, only to leave with even better questions. As the evening continued, Nathan found himself stretching a single dinner far longer than usual. His plate was nearly empty, yet he remained seated, occasionally watching the rhythm of the restaurant instead of the glowing screen of his phone. The device had not left his pocket once. That alone would have surprised every executive who worked with him. Claire continued moving gracefully between tables, never rushing despite the steady flow of guests. She remembered birthdays without checking reservation notes, recognized returning customers by name, and somehow noticed every raised hand before anyone needed to call for assistance. There was no performance in her work, only attention. Near the entrance, an older gentleman wearing a worn brown jacket hesitated before stepping inside. The maitre d' greeted him politely, but explained that every table had been reserved for the evening. The man nodded with understanding, thanked him, and quietly turned toward the door. Before he could leave, Claire approached with a gentle smile. She whispered something to the manager, who looked briefly uncertain before nodding. Moments later, she led the gentleman to a small table near the window that had been reserved for a late arrival. She placed a glass of water in front of him and handed him a menu without making him feel as though anyone was doing him a favor. Nathan observed the exchange with growing curiosity. When Claire returned to refill his water, he asked quietly, "I thought the restaurant was fully booked." "It is," she answered. "Then why did you seat him?" Claire glanced toward the elderly guest, who was carefully studying the menu with visible gratitude. "Because sometimes people need a place to belong more than they need a reservation." Nathan remained silent. Several minutes later, the manager approached Claire with a concerned expression. Nathan could not hear the conversation, but he noticed Claire reach into her own pocket and quietly hand the manager several folded bills. The manager hesitated before accepting them. After he walked away, Nathan waited until Claire returned. "What was that?" She looked briefly surprised. "Nothing important. It seemed important enough for you to pay for it." Claire hesitated only a moment. The gentleman forgot his wallet. Nathan looked toward the window. The older man was enjoying a simple bowl of soup and fresh bread, smiling softly as though it were the finest meal he had eaten in weeks. You paid for his dinner. Claire gave a small shrug. He looked embarrassed. Sometimes protecting someone's dignity costs less than letting them lose it. Nathan slowly lowered his eyes. In his world, generosity often arrived with cameras, press releases, charitable foundations, and carefully measured publicity. Claire had just given quietly, expecting no recognition at all. She had even tried to hide it. "Does the restaurant reimburse you?" he asked. Claire smiled faintly. "No." "Then why do it?" Her answer came almost immediately. "Because one day I might be the person who needs kindness from someone else." Nathan leaned back in his chair, absorbing every word. He suddenly remembered something his mother used to say before she passed away many years earlier. "Character is what you choose when nobody can repay you." He had not thought about those words in decades. Across the room, the elderly gentleman finished his meal, thanked the staff warmly, and left with a lighter step than when he had entered. He never knew who had paid for his dinner. Claire made certain of that. Nathan watched the door close behind him before speaking again. "Does anyone else know what you did?" Claire shook her head. "Now you do. You could have told him. Then it would have become about me instead of helping him." Their eyes met in quiet understanding. For the first time since building his fortune, Nathan realized that the greatest acts of generosity often disappeared before anyone had the chance to applaud them. In boardrooms, he had spent years measuring success through numbers, rankings, and public recognition. Yet sitting across from a waitress who quietly protected a stranger's pride, those measurements suddenly felt incomplete. Somewhere deep inside, a question began forming that no balance sheet could answer. What if the richest person in the room was not the one with the largest bank account, but the one who never allowed another human being to leave feeling smaller than when they arrived? The restaurant grew quieter as the evening moved toward closing time. Candles burned lower on each table, and the last few guests lingered over coffee while rain once again painted silver lines across the tall windows. Nathan remained seated long after his meal had ended, not because he wanted another course, but because leaving felt strangely unfinished. Claire returned with the check, placing the leather folder gently beside his empty glass. "Whenever you are ready, Mr. Carter." Nathan looked up. "Will you sit down for just 1 minute after your shift?" Claire considered the request carefully before answering. 1 minute is reasonable. She walked away to finish her remaining tables while Nathan quietly waited. For perhaps the first time in his professional life, he was not measuring time by productivity or profit. He was simply waiting for a conversation. Nearly 30 minutes later, the final guests departed. Chairs were carefully pushed beneath tables. The pianist closed the lid of the grand piano. Employees began preparing the dining room for another day. Claire removed her order book from her apron and approached Nathan's table, carrying 2 cups of fresh coffee. She placed one in front of him and kept the other for herself. "I thought you might still be here," she said with a small smile. Nathan looked at the untouched cup. "You remembered that I never drink coffee after dinner." Claire smiled again. "That one is herbal tea." Nathan laughed softly, surprising even himself. "You notice everything. It is part of my job. I think it is part of who you are." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. Nathan finally broke it. "I have spent the last week trying to understand you." Claire looked into the warm steam rising from her cup. "And did you?" "Not even close." She nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Nathan continued. "Your records say you graduated with honors. Your professors believed you would become an executive. Instead, you chose this life." Claire gently wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Life does not always move in straight lines. Nathan waited patiently. This time, Claire did not change the subject. "My mother became seriously ill during my last year of college. My father had already passed away. There were medical appointments, insurance paperwork, and a younger brother still in high school. Every plan I had suddenly belonged to another version of my life." Nathan listened without interrupting. "Several companies offered me interviews after graduation." Claire continued quietly. "But every position required travel or 60-hour workweeks. My family needed someone who could be present more than they needed another framed diploma on the wall." Nathan lowered his eyes. "So you stayed?" "I stayed." "Do you regret it?" Claire looked toward the empty dining room where the candles had almost burned out. "I miss certain dreams. but I do not regret loving the people who loved me first. Those words settled over the room with the same quiet strength as the sentence she had spoken a week earlier. Nathan thought about every promotion he had accepted, every holiday he had postponed, every family dinner he had canceled because another meeting appeared more urgent. He had always believed sacrifice was measured by what people gave up to achieve success. Claire measured sacrifice by what she willingly gave up for someone else. "How is your mother now?" he asked. Gently. Claire smiled with visible relief. "Much better. She volunteers at our local library 3 afternoons every week." "And your brother?" "He graduates from engineering school this spring." Nathan could not hide his admiration. "You helped make that possible." Claire shook her head. "We all helped each other." Nathan noticed that even now she refused to claim credit. Every achievement became shared. Every kindness belonged to everyone except herself. Looking at the woman sitting across from him, he finally understood why no background report had ever explained her. Documents could list degrees, jobs, and addresses. They could never record the quiet decisions that shaped a person's character. As the last candle flickered gently between them, Nathan realized that the most valuable education he had received all year had not taken place inside a boardroom. It had happened across a restaurant table, listening to someone who never considered compassion a sacrifice, only a responsibility. The conversation lingered in Nathan's mind long after he left the restaurant that evening. Driving through the quiet streets of Manhattan, he watched reflections of city lights slide across the windows of the car, yet he barely noticed the skyline that had once symbolized everything he had worked to achieve. Instead, he kept hearing Claire's simple words. "I do not regret loving the people who loved me first." By the time Monday morning arrived, the headquarters of Carter Technologies buzzed with its usual energy. Executives hurried between conference rooms carrying tablets and presentation folders. Stock prices flashed across giant digital displays. Assistants coordinated schedules measured down to the minute. Nathan walked through the lobby, greeting employees more slowly than usual. Several people exchanged puzzled glances. Something about him felt different. During the weekly executive meeting, a senior vice president presented a proposal recommending layoffs at a recently acquired company. Charts filled the large screen. Every number supported the decision. Lower costs, higher quarterly earnings, stronger shareholder confidence. The presentation ended, and everyone turned toward Nathan for the expected approval. He remained silent for several moments. Then he asked a question nobody expected. How many families would this affect? The room grew unusually quiet. One executive cleared his throat. Approximately 140 employees. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. Have we explored retraining programs before eliminating positions? Several executives exchanged uncertain looks. That question had never appeared on the agenda before. The director of human resources spoke carefully. It would require additional investment. Nathan folded his hands on the conference table. Then prepare both options. I want to compare long-term value, not only immediate savings. The meeting continued, but something subtle had shifted. For years, Nathan had trained his organization to evaluate every decision through efficiency and measurable performance. Now another measurement quietly entered the room. Human impact. Later that afternoon, Daniel stepped into Nathan's office carrying a stack of documents requiring signatures. Before leaving, he hesitated. "May I ask you something?" Nathan looked up from his desk. "Of course. Did that waitress change your business strategy?" Nathan smiled faintly. "No." Daniel looked relieved for a moment. Then Nathan continued. "She reminded me why I started building this company in the first place." Daniel waited. "When my father lost his job at the factory, one business owner hired him anyway because someone believed in people before numbers. Somewhere along the way, I became very good at remembering numbers and very poor at remembering people." Daniel nodded quietly before leaving the office. That Friday, Nathan returned to the restaurant once again, but this visit felt different from the previous two. He was not searching for answers anymore. He already knew the most important one. Claire greeted him with the same calm smile she offered every guest. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." Nathan returned the smile. "Good evening, Claire." Before ordering dinner, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a sealed envelope gently on the table. Claire looked at it without touching it. "What is this?" "An invitation." She waited. "Not a job offer." She looked mildly surprised. Nathan continued. Our company is launching a leadership program for young managers from nonprofit organizations, schools, hospitals, and local businesses. I would like you to speak during the opening session. Claire blinked. I am a waitress. Nathan smiled. Exactly. She looked genuinely confused. What could I possibly teach corporate executives? Nathan answered without hesitation. How to notice people before judging them. How to lead without raising your voice. How to earn respect instead of demanding it. Claire remained silent for several long moments. Around them, conversations continued, glasses clinked softly, and the pianist played another familiar melody. Finally, she looked at the unopened envelope once more before lifting her eyes to Nathan. For the first time since they had met, she seemed uncertain what to say. Nathan quietly added, "You changed one person in this room before you ever realized anyone was watching. Imagine what might happen if others heard the same lessons." Claire accepted the envelope, but she did not open it immediately. She looked at Nathan with the same calm expression that had first unsettled him weeks earlier. "I will think about it," she said gently. Nathan nodded. "That is all I ask." There was no pressure in his voice, no attempt to persuade her with promises or influence. For the first time in a very long time, he understood that meaningful decisions deserve patience. The following month, the leadership conference filled the grand ballroom of a downtown Manhattan hotel. Hundreds of executives, nonprofit directors, educators, and community leaders gathered beneath elegant chandeliers, expecting another day of presentations filled with charts, forecasts, and management strategies. Instead, Nathan stepped onto the stage carrying no slides and no prepared script. He looked across the audience before speaking. "The greatest lesson I learned this year did not come from a boardroom. It came from someone wearing an apron." Quiet curiosity spread through the room. Nathan smiled as he continued. "I once believed leadership meant having the loudest voice, the strongest position, and the final decision. I was wrong." He paused, then looked toward the side of the stage. Claire walked forward wearing a simple navy dress, her posture exactly as calm as it had always been. There was no dramatic entrance, no attempt to impress anyone. She simply walked to the podium, thanked Nathan with a warm smile, and looked at the audience. For a brief moment the room became completely silent. "I am not an executive," Claire began softly. "I have never managed a corporation. I have never negotiated a billion-dollar contract. I only know what I have learned by serving people one table at a time." Every eye remained fixed on her. People usually remember how important someone looked when they entered a room. They remember something different when they leave. They remember how that person made them feel. She spoke about listening before responding, about noticing the quiet employee who was never recognized, about protecting another person's dignity even when nobody else would know. She never mentioned Nathan by name. She never spoke about the evening they first met. She only shared simple truths gathered through ordinary moments. When she finished, the ballroom remained silent for several seconds before the audience slowly rose to its feet. The applause was long, sincere, and unlike anything Nathan had experienced after years of business awards and public recognition. He realized that people were not applauding because Claire had delivered a perfect speech. They were applauding because every word had been lived before it had ever been spoken. Several weeks later, life quietly returned to normal. Claire continued working at the restaurant 3 evenings each week while volunteering at a local community center on weekends. Nathan continued leading Carter Technologies, but employees soon noticed subtle changes throughout the company. Mentorship programs expanded. Scholarships were created for hourly workers pursuing higher education. Managers received training focused not only on performance, but also on empathy, respect, and communication. None of the new programs carried Claire's name. She had politely declined every public recognition Nathan suggested. "If the lesson matters," she had told him with a smile, "people do not need to know where it came from." One rainy evening, months after their first unforgettable meeting, Nathan returned once more to the restaurant. Claire greeted him exactly as she always had. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." Nathan smiled warmly. "Good evening, Claire." She poured his herbal tea without asking, and he thanked her before opening the menu he already knew by heart. Around them, conversations flowed naturally. Glasses reflected the warm candlelight. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed while an elderly couple shared dessert. It looked like an ordinary evening to everyone else. Nathan knew better. He understood that extraordinary moments rarely announced themselves. Sometimes they arrived wearing the simplest uniform in the room. Sometimes they spoke only one quiet sentence. And sometimes the greatest measure of a person's wealth was never found in a bank account, but in the number of lives made lighter simply because they had chosen kindness over pride. In the end, Claire never raised her voice. She simply raised the standard, and everyone fortunate enough to cross her path walked away a little richer than before.